5 years ago, my wife looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're not the man I married anymore." Then she grabbed 2 expensive suitcases, walked past our 8-year-old son without looking back, and slammed the front door behind her. I thought losing my business was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. Watching the woman I'd loved for 14 years choose someone else while my son cried in the hallway hurt far more than bankruptcy ever could. 5 years later, she walked into my office wearing an employee badge, froze the moment she saw my name on the CEO's door, and whispered, "Ethan." By then, it was already too late. My name is Ethan Brooks, and this is how losing everything became the greatest thing that ever happened to me. 5 years earlier, life looked perfect from the outside. I was operations director at North Star Logistics in Dallas, Texas. The salary was great, the bonuses were even better, and my wife Claire never had to worry about money. We lived in a beautiful suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets. Our son Mason attended one of the best elementary schools in the district, and every summer we took a family vacation somewhere new. Looking back, I spent so much time building the perfect life that I never noticed my marriage quietly falling apart. Claire loved success. She loved nice restaurants, designer handbags, luxury vacations, and telling her friends how hard I worked. Whenever people complimented our lifestyle, she'd smile proudly and wrap her arm around mine. Back then, I mistook pride for love. They aren't always the same thing. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday morning. Our company announced an emergency meeting. The board had decided to merge with a larger competitor after losing several major contracts. Hundreds of jobs were eliminated. Mine was one of them. After 16 years of loyalty, I was handed a severance package, a cardboard box for my belongings, and a polite handshake. Walking through the parking lot carrying that little box felt like carrying the weight of my entire future. I sat in my truck for nearly an hour before driving home. I kept rehearsing the conversation in my head. "Claire, I'll find another job. We'll get through this together." I honestly believed those words. She was sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee when I walked in. "You're home early." "I lost my job." She stared at me for a few seconds before asking, "How long can we keep the house?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just, "How long?" "We have savings," I answered. "We'll be fine for a while." She slowly nodded and went back to looking at her phone. That should have been my first warning. The following weeks became a routine. Every morning I woke up at 6, got dressed like I still had somewhere to be, and spent the entire day applying for jobs. Interviews came and went. Companies liked my experience but always chose someone younger, cheaper, or already employed. Every rejection email sounded exactly the same. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." Eventually I stopped reading them. Money disappeared faster than I expected. Mortgage payments, insurance, groceries, Mason's school expenses, everything added up. I started driving for Uber during the evenings and delivering packages on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I refused to sit at home feeling sorry for myself. Claire hated it. "You used to wear suits," she said one night after I came home exhausted. "Now you're delivering groceries." "I'm providing for my family." She laughed. "No. You're surviving." Mason heard every word. Later that night he quietly knocked on my bedroom door. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy. You're still my hero." I smiled even though my eyes were burning. "Thanks, champ." He hugged me tightly before walking back to bed. Children have a way of reminding you what's actually important. 3 months later, Claire stopped pretending. She started staying out late, business dinners. Girls' nights, weekend trips, every explanation sounded rehearsed. One Friday afternoon I came home early after finishing deliveries and found 2 expensive suitcases sitting beside the front door. Claire walked downstairs wearing a dress I'd never seen before. "What are the suitcases for?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm leaving," she repeated. I honestly thought she was angry and trying to scare me. Claire, we're going through a rough season. We'll get through it. She slowly shook her head. No, Ethan. You're going through a rough season. I'm just refusing to go down with you. Every word landed harder than the last. What about Mason? I asked. She looked toward the staircase where our son was standing quietly, holding his favorite basketball. He'll be better off with you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're leaving your own son. She looked away instead of answering. A black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out wearing an expensive tailored suit. I recognized him immediately. Ryan Caldwell. A financial consultant she'd introduced to me months earlier at a charity dinner. He's just helping with investments, she'd told me back then. Apparently he had been helping with much more than investments. Ryan carried one suitcase toward the car without saying a word. Claire picked up the other. Mason slowly walked toward her. Mom, are you coming back for my baseball game tomorrow? She forced a smile that lasted barely a second. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Is it because Dad lost his job? She froze. No. Then why are you leaving? She had no answer. She kissed the top of his head, turned around, and walked out the front door. Mason stood completely still until the Mercedes disappeared around the corner, then he quietly asked the question that broke me. Dad, did Mom stop loving us? I pulled him into my arms. No matter what happens. I'm never leaving you. That was the only promise I knew I could keep. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Claire never asked for custody. She never fought for the house because the bank had already taken it. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Dallas. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Every morning I made Mason breakfast before school. Every evening we ate dinner together at the same little table beside the kitchen window. Life became simpler. Harder, but simpler. I kept working every job I could find. Delivery driver. Warehouse supervisor on weekends. Freelance logistics consultant whenever someone needed temporary help. I wasn't chasing luxury anymore. I was chasing stability. One evening my best friend Jason called. I know someone looking for an operations consultant. I almost laughed. Jason. I've sent out over 300 applications. This one's different. How? Because they're not hiring your resume. He paused. They're hiring your reputation. 2 days later I walked into a small logistics startup operating out of an old warehouse. The owner, Robert Hamilton, spent 15 minutes asking about business. The next 45 minutes he asked about leadership, failure, and family. Finally he leaned back and smiled. Everyone else keeps telling me about their success. You're the first candidate who admitted his biggest mistakes. I shrugged. Failure teaches faster than success. He nodded. Exactly. Before I left his office, he offered me a temporary consulting contract. That contract changed everything. Within 6 months, I redesigned their entire distribution system. Delivery times improved. Costs dropped. Clients stayed longer. Robert promoted me to operations vice president. 2 years later we expanded into 5 new states. 3 years later we acquired 2 competing companies. Robert became less involved in day-to-day operations and trusted me with almost every major decision. For the first time since losing everything, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building again. Mason noticed the difference before I did. One night while we were grilling burgers on our apartment balcony, he smiled and said, "You're laughing again." I looked at him. Was I not? He shook his head. Not for a long time. I smiled. Thanks for sticking with me, buddy. He shrugged. You stuck with me first. 5 years passed faster than I expected. Robert announced his retirement during a board meeting and looked directly at me. There's only one person I trust to lead this company. The board voted unanimously. The following Monday, my name appeared on the office entrance beneath the words, Chief Executive Officer. On my third day as CEO, Emily from Human Resources knocked on my office door. We have interviews for the regional client relations position this afternoon. I nodded. Send in the first candidate. I looked down at the resume lying on my desk. The name at the top made my heart stop, Claire Donovan Brooks, I stared at it for several seconds before the door slowly opened. The door opened slowly. Claire walked in carrying a leather portfolio and a nervous smile. She looked exactly the same, until she saw me. The smile disappeared instantly. Her face turned pale. Ethan, she whispered. I stood up calmly. Good afternoon, Ms. Donovan. Please, have a seat. She remained frozen for several seconds before slowly sitting down. I could see her hands shaking. She glanced at the nameplate on my desk, then back at me as if she still couldn't believe what she was seeing. You're the CEO. I nodded. As of Monday. She looked down at her resume. I didn't know. I figured. The room fell silent. 5 years of memories filled that silence. The last time we'd been alone together, she'd called me a failure. Now she couldn't even look me in the eyes. I opened her resume. You have solid experience in client relations. She nodded quietly. After everything happened, Ryan and I started a consulting firm. I looked up. Started? She forced a bitter smile. It failed. I'm sorry to hear that. She looked surprised by my answer. You're sorry. Failure isn't something I celebrate. She lowered her eyes. Ryan left 2 years ago. I didn't respond. It wasn't my business anymore. She took a deep breath. Ethan, before this interview goes any further, I owe you an apology. I closed the resume and folded my hands. Go ahead. Tears formed in her eyes. When you lost your job. I panicked. I thought everything we built was disappearing. Instead of standing beside you, I ran. Her voice cracked. I convinced myself I deserved an easier life. She looked directly at me. I was wrong. I listened without interrupting. She continued. The day I walked away, I didn't just lose my husband. Another tear rolled down her cheek. I lost the best man I ever knew. For a moment neither of us spoke. Finally I said, thank you for apologizing. She looked hopeful. Does that mean? She took a deep breath. Ethan, before this interview goes any further, I owe you an apology. I closed the resume and folded my hands. Go ahead. Tears formed in her eyes. When you lost your job, I panicked. I thought everything we built was disappearing. Instead of standing beside you, I ran. Her voice cracked. I convinced myself I deserved an easier life. She looked directly at me. I was wrong. I listened without interrupting. She continued. The day I walked away, I didn't just lose my husband. Another tear rolled down her cheek. I lost the best man I ever knew. For a moment neither of us spoke. Finally I said, thank you for apologizing. She looked hopeful. Does that mean? I gently shook my head. It means I accept your apology. Her shoulders dropped. She understood exactly what I meant that I slid her resume back across the desk. Claire, this position reports directly to senior management. She nodded. I understand. If I hire you, people will assume I did it because of our past. She quietly whispered, I know. I looked at her work history one more time. Everything she'd written was true. She was qualified. My personal feelings couldn't change that. I pressed the intercom. Emily, could you step into my office for a moment? Emily entered a few seconds later. Yes, Ethan. I handed her the resume. Please continue Ms. Donovan's interview using the standard hiring process. Emily looked confused. You're not making the decision. I smiled. No. Then I looked at Claire. Everyone who works here earns their position. Claire slowly nodded. Thank you. Before leaving, she stopped at the door. There's one more thing. I waited. Mason. Her voice barely came out. Does he ever ask about me? I looked out the office window for several seconds before answering. Not anymore. Those two words hurt her more than anything else I'd said. She quietly walked out, leaving me alone with memories I thought I'd buried years ago. That evening I arrived home to find 16-year-old Mason shooting basketballs in the driveway. You're late, he laughed. Big CEO meeting? I smiled. Something like that. We walked inside together. Halfway through dinner I casually asked, do you remember your mom? He looked at me for a moment before putting down his fork. Every now and then. If she wanted to see you. I hesitated. What would you say? Mason didn't answer immediately. He stared out the kitchen window, thinking carefully. Finally he looked back at me. I'd listen. I raised an eyebrow. Really? He nodded. Listening doesn't mean forgetting. I realized then, my son had become wiser than most adults I'd ever met. 3 days later Emily knocked on my office door. The hiring committee has made its decision. I looked up from my laptop. And? She smiled. Claire ranked first out of every candidate. I leaned back in my chair. Then hire her. Emily nodded. Effective Monday. Effective Monday. She smiled. I'll let her know. As she walked out, I realized something. 5 years earlier Claire believed my success defined my value. Today I had the opportunity to prove that my character did. She wasn't getting the job because she had once been my wife. She was getting it because she earned it. Claire started the following Monday. The first few weeks were awkward. We rarely spoke outside of meetings. Whenever we did, the conversation stayed professional. She never asked for special treatment. I never offered it. Gradually the office stopped seeing us as former spouses and started seeing us as two professionals doing their jobs. One Friday afternoon Claire knocked on my office door. Do you have a minute? Come in. She closed the door behind her. I was wondering, she hesitated. If Mason would be willing to see me. I stayed silent for a moment. I won't force him. I know. I just want one chance to apologize. I nodded slowly. I'll ask him. That evening I told Mason everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked down at his plate. Do you think she's changed? I honestly don't know. He thought for another minute before answering. I'll meet her. The following Saturday we met at a quiet park outside Dallas. Claire arrived 20 minutes early. She looked terrified. When Mason stepped out of my truck, she immediately began crying. I know. But one day. Mason continued, Dad told me something. He said you can't control who walks away. You can only control who you become. He smiled slightly. I decided to become like him. Claire looked toward me. For the first time in years, there wasn't guilt in her eyes. There was respect. She looked back at Mason. I don't deserve to be called your mother. He slowly shook his head. No. You don't. But. He paused. I can forgive you. Her tears fell even harder. Really? I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't change the past. It just means I don't want to carry the anger anymore. Claire nodded through tears. I understand. She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't ask for another chance. She simply thanked him. As we walked back toward my truck, Mason looked up at me. You were right. About what? Forgiveness feels lighter than anger. I smiled. It usually does. 6 months later our company celebrated its biggest year in history. During the annual leadership dinner Robert Hamilton raised his glass. To Ethan Brooks. The best decision this company ever made. Everyone applauded. Across the room I noticed Claire smiling. Not because she wished we were together again, but because she was genuinely happy to see someone she had once underestimated succeed. Sometimes people ask whether I ever regretted losing everything. The answer is no. Because I didn't lose everything. I lost the people who only loved my success. I kept the people who loved me. My son. My friends. My integrity. And in the end, those were the only things that truly mattered. If my story taught you anything, let it be this. The people who leave when life gets hard were never in love with you. They were in love with your circumstances. And circumstances can change overnight. Character never does.